Welcome to Louisa May Alcott is My Passion, the podcast.
I call you friend, though you lived long before me. It's your words, your wisdom shining through.
For all of you who are endlessly fascinated with the life and works of Louisa May Alcott, this is your podcast. Here we gather as scholars, teachers, students, and fans to learn from each other, talk with each other, and celebrate our passion for the Alcotts. We'll read from Louisa's works, share the latest news, discuss her work and life with fascinating guests, and sometimes even hear from the old girl herself. And now, on with the show.
You've become my muse, my guide, my sage. I will remember you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Bailey from Louisa May Alcott is My Passion blog, and I'm thrilled today to be able to speak with Liz Rosenberg. She wrote a book called Scribbles, Sorrows, and Russet Boots. It's a young adult novel on the story of Louisa May Alcott, but frankly, I think it's got a lot in it that adults will enjoy, and I certainly learned a lot. I've read just about all of the biographies, and I learned a lot out of this biography. And I'm hoping that with our discussion today, you'll see the things that I saw that were different about this biography that would encourage you to read it. So, Liz, tell us about why you wrote this book and what your feelings are about Louisa.
First of all, I'm delighted to be here. So thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
I love your blog. And as you know, I've been following it for quite a few years. I have loved Louisa May Alcott since I was a young child. And the very first biography I ever read was a book called Louisa May Alcott, Girl of Old Boston.
Oh, yes, I know that book.
Yeah, and somewhere in the house, I actually have that original copy. And I remember how much it struck me because even as a little kid, I was very interested in books and authors. And I was thrilled by the idea that there could be a book about someone who wrote books. And that it was a female author, I think, also really appealed to me. And there was something about Louisa herself that I think always appealed to me. I just remembered such a goofy thing, but when I was in 4th or 5th grade, all the kids were asked to write a play in which a real life person met fictional characters.
Oh.
And I wrote a play in which Louisa May Alcott met the characters from Peter Pan.
Oh.
I don't know how I came up with that idea, but it just struck me now that, even that early, I was already kind of fooling around with the idea of getting to know her better.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Yeah, it was. Now, you met Louisa before you read Little Women then?
No, I had already read Little Women. I read that when I was very young.
Oh, okay. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was this idea of Louisa and being a genius, because that was something, of course, that was very much stressed in the Transcendentalist movement about genius, although I think it has different definitions for different people. But Louisa was famous for saying that she was not a genius. But from your book, it appears that there may have been a time when she might have thought that she was a genius. And I was wondering if you could expound on that.
Yeah, and it was not while she was writing Little Women, of course. She was doing that for money and also, I think, largely really to help her father because there was a publisher who was willing to publish Bronson's work if Louisa would agree to write this quote unquote girls' books. And she wasn't interested in writing a book for girls. And so, in fact, I think as she was beginning it or had written some of the chapters, she said, I think it's rather dull. And so does the editor. That was before she had moved all the way through it, and it was before they discovered how much the rest of the world loved it. But while she was working on what she would have considered her first serious literary novel, Moods, she really went into what she called a vortex. And this writing vortex was something that happened to her, I think, twice, basically twice in her life, once with Moods and once with Work, her second literary novel. And, she just sort of describes that, mad genius would burn, and that her mother brought her cups of tea, and Bronson went out and delivered his finest apples to her door. And she was kind of treated as the genius of the family, probably for the first time in her life.
Mhm.
So, when she went into this vortex, it does sound almost like extremely constructive mania at its best, you might call it, because she didn't sleep, she didn't eat, she just sat and wrote. And so she was having one of those kind of experiences that writers have sometimes where, as my late husband used to say, they're on the escalator. You just sort of step and you feel like you're being carried.
Mhm.
But, the evidence kind of indicates that her best work happened when she was not thinking of herself as a literary genius, when she was simply writing what it was she had in her to write.
Mhm. Now, you had mentioned that Bronson had also experienced this kind of mania. I particularly recall right after Fruitlands, when they were living with the Lovejoys, and then and he was going through the winter, writing frantically, and up 24 hours a day and barely eating, and getting into these ecstatic experiences.
Sure.
Yeah. So there was
Yeah,
just,
saying he was on the verge of great cosmic discoveries. And I think he even knocked at an acquaintance's door and said that he had the answer to all the mysteries. And it was pretty clear that he would enter into those periods sometimes.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
happened also when he was running the temple school, and he
Yeah.
was talking about his students as his disciples. And yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there was a little bit of that kind of mood instability, perhaps, in the family, or maybe just modeling of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you say, lots of talk among the friends of the family about the importance of genius and the role of genius. But, and of course, I think for any of us, a lot of it is wishful thinking.
Yes, and we know where that gets us sometimes.
Yeah. One of my favorite moments for Louisa, though, was after she had published Little Women, and I think a few of her books, and her old sort of frenemy, Henry James, the novelist, was
yeah.
there at dinner. And he said something like, Louisa, people are telling you that you're a genius, but you mustn't believe them.
Yeah, well, apparently she didn't after a while, after when she came to her senses, you might say. It's almost like she wrote better on assignment than she did, just
Yeah.
because she felt like being a writer for a day, that kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, it's really interesting. She did though, there was genius in her writing of Little Women, because it was so different from anything that had been written before about children, and particularly about adolescents. And I remember a line from Gerwig's movie between Amy and Joe about, Joe was basically saying, domestic, people are not interested in domestic things, and so it's not important. And Amy was saying, no, putting it down on paper makes it important.
Mhm.
And that's basically what she did. She took common everyday life,
Yes.
all its trials, its victories, its tragedies, what everybody experienced and lived, and she put it down into a book that people could read and kind of lose themselves in, and say, that's me. I've been through that. And with
Yeah,
George,
she captured it beautifully, and she created imperfect characters, imperfect heroines. At that point in the 19th century, we were still getting very kind of painted over pictures or images of what children in childhood was supposed to be like. And she starts Little Women with the sisters grumbling and kind of quarreling. That's radical, and
Yeah.
that's genius right there.
And of course, right away, anybody reading that book would go, that's me, I've done that,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
just immediately, that
Yeah.
was the genius, was being able to take the ordinary and, give it to the public so that they could actually see themselves reflected in the work. But she didn't understand. I don't know if she fully understood. I think some part of her understood that she was doing that, but the other part was like, yeah, but I wrote it for money, and but so what if you wrote it for money? You needed the money, so I mean that's okay. It's okay. But you wrote here on page 283 about Little Women. Louisa had no lofty aspiration for this book, so ambition didn't get in her way. She recorded no writing vortex, no burning image of herself as the household literary genius. She simply wrote what was in her to write.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's the big difference between, and you can see that in the way that Little Women is constructed versus the way Moods is constructed, which,
Yes.
Moods is a hot mess. I mean, it's
I'm glad you said that, so I didn't have to. But yeah, I would
I
agree.
do have to say I did enjoy work. I hated the end when, she went off on that tangent with David and that Kitty woman, that was stupid. But the rest of it I thought was I thought the vignettes were interesting, and that was actually kind of similar to, Little Women in the beginning was a bunch of vignettes too. So I mean it was kind of a similar thing for her. But I actually enjoyed that book. But
Well, I think I mean, it's kind of like genius will out. So even when she's not working at her best, there's something in her that does in fact shine through. I actually like The Inheritance, which I think everybody dismisses. And that really was her first novel, but I think she creates a wonderful anti-heroine in that book, who's the most interesting character, the sort of bitter, jealous old spinster who's trying to manipulate what's happening in the plot, but you end up kind of liking her in spite of yourself, feeling for her. And there's a different kind of fluidity, though, isn't there, and speed in the whole rhythm of Little Women than Mood or Work,
Right.
because it's almost it feels very choppy and kind of constrained in Mood. So you can feel how hard she was laboring to get it right. And of course, she worked on that book for another 20 years after it was published. She kept trying to go back and fix it.
right.
And
Right.
some things just ain't fixable. So, but in the meantime, she wrote many works of genius, and she had already written, I think, her first great work, which was Hospital Sketches.
Yes, Hospital Sketches definitely was. That book was uneven, but the parts that were good were so good that you didn't really pay attention to the stuff that was weak. I mean, it just was, the chapter A Night is just an incredible. That's one of my favorite pieces of her writing. It's just so poignant, and so it really tapped into her. She had a way of capturing tragedy that was just. Well, I'll tell you, when I after my mother died, Hospital Sketches was the first of her books that I read, and I found it to be like a grief counselor. I mean, it just was her hopefulness, and in spite of the way it all went down, it just was. I really appreciated that. And by the way, chapter 1 with all the humorous stuff in it, Gabrielle Donnelly, who usually comes to the summer conversational series, she lives in California, and she has a wonderful British accent, and she reads that. You just, oh my goodness, the humor just so comes out when she reads it. It's something that you must hear someday. It's just wonderful.
Where she's trying to get to the train and all the mishaps.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, mixing
all of a sudden that
salt
chapter
in with
just
her
came alive
tea.
for me when she read it. Yeah.
It is. It's very funny, and it's very smart of her. It's really artful, because she is about to introduce you into what was at the time basically the first bird's eye view of the Civil War. It was moment to moment reporting, and people were incredibly anxious and eager to read what she had witnessed.
Yes.
And she's sort of setting you up for the tragedy to come, because it wasn't long after she arrived that she's awakened before dawn by that ringing of the bells and the voices calling out, they're coming, and then literally the wounded, the injured, and the dead are unloaded at the door of that sort of hotel/hospital. And it's kind of like what Hawthorne does at the beginning of Scarlet Letter. If you read that little forward kind of thing he does, it's hilarious. It's actually incredibly funny when he writes about the Custom House and his work at the Custom House. It's a comic piece. It's like he's setting you up for the fall. And I think she's sort of doing that. And it's also a great way to bring the reader into you.
Yes.
Is to kind of bring them in with some humor, with some relief.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah. So I agree. I think that's a wonderful beginning to that essay. And it's an incredible piece of work.
Yeah, I agree. I want to jump ahead to her potboilers, because that seems like a good time to be discussing that. And you had written the following on page 269. Critics today do praise her once scorned potboilers like A Long Fatal Love Chase, which, by the way, I love that book. But these show only glimpses of her real genius. She did what she could with stock characters and cheap thrill effects, much as she had done with her earliest theatrical productions made of cardboard and tinsel. She wrote a dozen such stories in the last 6 months of 1866 alone, roughly 2 a month. I thought that the connection between the potboilers and the theatricals was perfect, because that's exactly what she was doing. And if you read some of those theatricals, it's exactly what she was doing. So it was always there.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the plots are even, pretty much the same. And so she got to experiment with a form before she even really began working in it. And of course, she was reading those things. I mean, she loved to read those, melodramatic thrillers, and kind of, it would be like, people being addicted to Gothic romances now, or, things like that. And some people do love them. I know people, I have friends who love The Long Fatal Love Chase. I'm not a huge fan of those works, but I'm interested in what it shows me about Louisa.
Well, I think, frankly, that's what most people are interested in. I'm not a big fan of the thrillers either. They don't ring true to me. But I think, the fact that they were discovered, the fact that they were like the polar opposite of what people had been led to believe about Louisa, it showed this whole other aspect of her personality. And when you go through her history and you realize what she's been through, that this was a real escape from her to get away from the sometimes suffocating moral atmosphere of her life.
Yes.
It gave her permission to do that. And, and she kept it secret from her parents. So I'm wondering if she kept Pauline's Passion and Punishment a secret since she won the $100 prize.
Ooh, and I should know the answer to that. I don't remember knowing whether her family knew about that or not. I know
she could just as easily have said, "Oh, I wrote something and I got $100 for it." But I mean, it is interesting.
Seems like the family would have asked though to read it, because they were interested.
Yeah.
And when she, many years later, after she was, of course, known as the children's friend, she did that a book in that series, the anonymous series, right?
Yep.
Where they asked authors to anonymously write a book, and then it would be published, and then people would love to guess who the author had really been.
Right.
And I know she showed that to her mom. I know she showed that book to her mom before it was published. And, her mother had sort of comments to make about it and was supportive of it. But that was a long time down the road. So I'm not sure what the answer is to that one, actually.
I'll have to put that one out to the community and see if somebody has an idea about that. But it just struck me when I was reading that. It's like, I wonder if anybody knew about that particular story. Yeah.
That one has a little more balance than some of her others, too. It is her perils and her punishment. So it's possible that one is what she might have been willing to share with her family.
Yeah, because Pauline got her due in the end. So I mean,
exactly. So you do get that kind of little moral stamp on the story, and that's not always the case. Yeah.
That's right. Yep. I would like to move on to talking about Laddie and the whole
Ah,
story
Laddie.
about Laddie. And one thing that you do that is a little different than what other people have done is you bring Anna Weld into the story, into the relationship a lot more than other people do. In fact, the only other one that I think brought it up that way was Madeline Stern, but her conclusion was is that Laddie was in love with Anna and not Louisa.
Right.
Whereas well, I'm going to let you explain why you approached it the way you did.
Well, I was looking for evidence. I think as a biographer, I think of myself largely as a detective. Honestly, I'm looking for evidence. And so I look as closely as I can at the clues, and I try to gather as many clues as I possibly can. So I tried to go back and almost like reenact what had happened and just kind of gather up, for instance, the idea that Laddie just happened to show up
Oh,
on a
yeah.
platform in Paris on a given day at a given time. And she said, "Oh, fancy my surprise to see Laddie standing there waving his hat." I mean, who could possibly buy that story? Obviously, they had prearranged that meeting.
Mhm.
And so you just kind of look at how the facts are. And part of the whole story with Anna Weld is that it was a kind of triangle, except I don't think it was a love triangle. I believe it was a friendship and companionship triangle, and with a much greater level of intensity
Mhm.
between Louisa and Laddie. After all,
Mhm.
she is the one he was slipping notes to every night under her door.
Mhm.
She's the one he was giving the rose to every night, and they would go off on long walks together. You don't hear anything about any of that happening with Anna. So
No, and Anna was the one who wanted to leave Bebe.
yes,
So
yes, that's right. That's right. So there's hardly any evidence that you can scrape together that there was anything going on between Laddie and Anna, except for that brief kind of entry in one of her journals where Louisa is kind of saying that that's why they had to leave and that's what was happening. But as I
oh,
say in the biography, I really think she's throwing up as much smoke and mirrors as she possibly can about that whole relationship with Laddie, from saying that, she accidentally met him in Paris to, oh no, she was really going to England. The fact that she didn't write any journal entries during just those 2 weeks,
right.
um, kind of like out of her whole
Well, of
life.
course, we don't know if she wrote any journal entries because she probably destroyed them if she wrote. I mean, if it meant that much to her, she would have written it down, but she likely
Yes,
destroyed it.
it's possible, although my sense was that you can see it. And unlike places where you can see that pages have been cut out or ripped out,
Yes.
it really
Mhm.
seemed that maybe what she did was kept a separate notebook. I would
Yeah.
not have, yeah. And maybe she was finally allowing herself to just live,
Yeah.
because that's what she was really doing. She was really living a free life
Mhm.
for that fortnight. And that wasn't a luxury she had very much, right? She spent so much of her life caring for others, providing for the family, doing what other people expected of her.
That's
And
right.
so to do something so unexpected and so much what she wanted to do, where she wanted to do it, and with whom she wanted to do it, that
Mhm.
she might have just said, you know what, I'm going to live at
Mhm.
this time in my life.
Yeah. What struck me, I don't know why it hadn't struck me earlier, but what struck me is the similarity between Louisa and May in terms of these May December romances. I mean, you have
Yeah,
Louisa, who was probably what, about 33, 32, I guess, and he was 20. And May was 38, although she said she was 32, and
right,
Ernest was 21.
right.
And I think it's a very interesting parallel in that they both did that. They both did it in Europe, which you could get away with it in Europe, where you couldn't get away with it at home. And but the way that they both responded to it, one was tied up with obligation and propriety, and the other's like, I want to be happy. I'm going to do what I want.
Yes, yes. And May was definitely the more headstrong sister. She's the one who writes back to her father's letter of advice saying, yes, that's wonderful advice. And I don't intend to follow it. And off I go. And that's not at all how Louisa was. She, I think about that moment in her journal when things have come to an end and she writes, couldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And she has just scratched out what was underneath it so hard, she tears through the paper.
Mm-hmm.
You can just feel how much emotion went into the idea that she had to send Laddie away, that she
Mhm.
couldn't do what May was able to do.
Right, right. And it makes me wonder if May was aware at all of Louisa's relationship with Laddie, if she ever talked about it with her. I tend to kind of think not, but
I would think not.
yeah.
But what I think is also interesting about the fact that these two sisters, who were, I think, the most alike of the four,
Mhm.
kind of had the same romantic interests or inclinations. And I think it's interesting that growing up in a household where so much revolved early on around the father, who
Mhm.
was really not taking care of the children or his wife in
Mhm.
ways that, we would consider to be required, like
Mhm.
making sure they're fed and clothed and have a roof over their head. The fact that they both look to younger men instead of anything like a father figure, I
Mm.
think is really fascinating.
That is
So,
interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting.
yeah,
And in Louisa's case, she tried to. I think part of her. I think she was a bit. She was a bit conflicted. I think part of her did look at Laddie in a motherly sense, like she
mhm,
looked at the soldiers in the hospital. But there was
yes,
another part of her that definitely did not. And
yeah,
she didn't elaborate on that so much, except to say, how wonderful that sojourn was in Paris.
yes, yes. And
Yeah.
tiny little glimpses in things like My Boys or my Polish Boy, where she will make that character come to life. And you get just a little glimpse of his appeal. And of
Mhm.
course, he would have been doubly appealing to her because he was a soldier when she met him, right?
Yes, that's right. And yes, that's right.
He's dressing the part and he's been fighting bravely in a war of, liberation and freedom. And so there's a whole lot about Laddie that kind of fits into her quote unquote type. She had lots of her boys during her life. And I
That's
think
right.
somehow that's what she was drawn to,
Yes,
which is
that's
not to say she didn't have crushes on older men when she was younger, like much
right.
younger.
Right,
But
exactly.
I think she came past that and sort of realized, no, that's not the relationship I'm most drawn to.
Hmm. Yeah, that's right. Now it's funny. Another thing that I was thinking of, which is a little bit off track, is when May married Ernest so soon after her mother's death. I
Yeah.
think it was like 3 months later. And but at the same time, when Lizzie died, Anna announced to her family only 3 weeks after Lizzie died that she was going to get married. So I mean, they both found consolation from their grief in somebody else outside the family. And
Right.
Louisa had difficulty with both of them in what they did. I mean, she couldn't conceive of them looking outside of the family for for what they needed, and in this case, both Anna and May reached out to someone else, the outside of the family, in order to help them with what they were going through.
Yes.
And frankly, I think it's an absolute miracle that Anna met John Pratt and was able to establish a life for herself. She was darn close to not being able to do that, and I think that
Yes.
was amazing that he came along when he did.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a life-saving moment, I think, for
Mm-hmm.
Anna. And
Yeah.
and I do think that she was naturally more drawn to um a domestic life and to an
Mm-hmm.
orderly life.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes out not just in the character of Meg, but in the character of the other sister, the older sister
Mm-hmm.
in Moods. And
Yes,
um,
yes, that's
yeah,
right. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But Anna's a lot sharper than she gets credit for, don't you think?
Oh, I think she is fascinating. I think her writing is so good, and course, the lovely thing about her writing is you can actually read it, for one thing. But I mean, she's got so much to say. I mean, she's just very thoughtful. Even as a young girl, she was very thoughtful. I wish that
Yeah.
her journal from Fruitlands hadn't been cut off at the point when things were getting serious, because I really would have loved to have read what she thought about what was going on. I mean,
Yeah.
she was very open, just really open and raw, and but just so thoughtful and eloquent at the same time. I mean, I think she's definitely an overlooked character in that family.
She is, yeah. And those kind of recently, I don't know if you'd say they're published. Are they published or are they simply made available to
You mean
readers
her
now?
diary from
Her diary, yeah.
yeah. I know the man who did the transcription, and he published them on his website, and he's now published them on archive.org. And he did a really wonderful job of transcribing her. Oh, he just did he's a very, very meticulous scholar, and he did a real service to all of us by doing that.
He truly did. I mean, that's an enormous addition. And, people who do love Louisa May Alcott and do love her books would probably be fascinated by, the things that you learned that Anna felt and Anna saw, and her feelings about Louisa, her idea about her. There was a lot of understanding there, I think.
Yeah, I agree. There was something. Oh, I'd like to finally, I'd like to focus on her health problems in the latter part of her life, which began with her getting the typhoid pneumonia and being dosed with calomel, which is a mercury component. And I was wondering if you would like to share some thoughts about her health.
Well, it was terrible. It was terrible from the time that she got the typhoid pneumonia and really till the rest of her life. And I think in order to understand that, you need to understand, first of all, the level of self-sacrifice that continued even into her illness, right? I mean, the head nurse who later died of the typhoid pneumonia was begging Louisa to get out of there and go home. She kept refusing and saying, no, I promised that I would be here for this long and I'm going to stay. And I think that Louisa was so loved, even in the short time she'd been there, so loved by the staff and the doctors that every time somebody came by her room, they kind of gave her another dose of calomel because that was considered this miracle drug, right? So they were trying to help her. But it's like walking by somebody's room and giving them a little more poison every time you see them. Yeah. Mercury has long lasting effects. It's kind of slow to reveal itself. And once it gets started, it just kind of keeps escalating. So she was never really well after that time.
No. And I like the fact that you brought in, she kept saying over and over, but it gets dismissed by a lot of people, that overwork had a lot to do with exacerbating her symptoms. Like, yes, of course. I mean, sure. But she said it, over and over, and she documented very carefully all of her different ailments and whatever, but she did constantly put in that she could not stop her mind from working, and she was just a compulsive workaholic, and partly due to that energy that was in her and partly out of duty. I think it pretty much half and half, by the time she was really ill, because I mean, the family was plenty well off by that point, but she always feared that, it was going to be taken away, whatever.
Right. It was the essence of who she was. She was a storyteller and a kind of a liberal preacher, and she needed to be able to express ideas and stories. And so I think for her, almost the worst of the illness would be those times when she physically, literally could not work or was told she couldn't work.
Right.
And her friends commented on that. They commented on how much she suffered from being told that she couldn't do her writing.
Yeah. Now, you brought up something that I'd actually wanted to bring up a little earlier, and that is the whole idea of Louisa as storyteller. And that I personally take everything that she says with a grain of salt, because she's a storyteller. She's going to, I have my brother-in-law was a wonderful storyteller, and he always exaggerated. I mean, we'd always roll our eyes and laugh whenever he told the stories, because they'd get bigger and bigger each time he told them. And and we know of times that she, has taken something that's happened and, built it up, to make it more interesting. So
Of course.
I always, whenever I read anything that she says about anything, I always kind of parse it and, okay, what's true here and what's, part of that storytelling.
Yeah,
around that
what's invented, right,
personality.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Well, like going out to service, which is another one of her brilliant essays. And I'm putting together a book of essays for an English publisher, right? Have I mentioned that to you?
No. Oh,
Yeah,
wow. That's
I'm very
awesome.
excited about that because I really do love the work she did in the essay form. And in going out to service, she makes the story of her becoming a sort of, I don't know, maid of all jobs for this very oily employer on pretense that she's going to be taking care of his invalid sister. And that's clearly not really all he has in mind. She writes it as comedy, and it's incredibly funny. I mean, it's as funny as the very funniest parts of Little Women, I would say. But yet her best friend said that in later years, she could never talk about that incident in her own real life of going out to service without tears coming into her eyes, because it was, humiliating, and it was such hard work and such a disappointment, and just, kind of a devastating experience for this young woman. She was maybe 17 years old, to think she was going to help someone in real life. I believe it was a lawyer, and then discover that, she was there to sort of be his admirer and his devotee. And I'm sure more than that, right?
Right.
And instead she ends up kind of being Cinderella because she says no.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think she often made things comical that were largely tragic. I think that's one of the ways she survived. And I think it's one of the ways she helps us survive, is to be able to kind of laugh through our tears.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. That's really good. Well, I thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. And I really can't recommend this book highly enough.
Oh, thank you.
Scribbles, Sorrows, and Russet Leather Boots. Love the title. It's awesome.
Thank you.
And I did write a review of it on booktrib.com, and it's also on my blog. I think I wrote it like maybe did your book come out just before the end of last year? Is that it?
It came out this fall.
This fall. Okay, yeah. So about 6 months ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can find that review on booktrib.com, and also on Louisa May Alcott is mypassion.com. And Liz, thank you so much for joining with me today. And I look forward to sharing these thoughts with everybody.
Great. It's been my pleasure. Take care. Bye.
Bye.